Record it.
Hello, everybody. I'm just here talking today, which is DGUTS. DGUTS, how are you doing?
I'm outstanding. How are you?
I'm doing great. Welcome, everybody, to the Stories of Service podcast, ordinary people who do extraordinary work. I am the host of the Stories of Service podcast, Teresa Carpenter. You guys haven't seen me much on social media. I am taking a strategic pause, especially from political content as of late. It's been a kind of a dicey environment. So I've decided to take a little bit of a break from all that. And same with you. You did the same thing for about 3 months, right?
Yeah, so I took a break from everything for about 3 months. Like I wasn't doing the podcast, I wasn't doing anything. But yeah, I was also retreating from just like paying attention and consuming that type of content, just because it influences me in a way that I didn't like recognize, or I was almost too prideful to accept that I was that susceptible to outside influences. And I just started to realize more and more as I tried to keep up with what was going on in the world and understand it, because I'm just a curious, like intellectually curious person. I want to read, I want to learn, I want to understand both sides of everything. And so like it started way back with Ukraine when I was still on active duty, and then the Israel-Palestine thing. And it's just, I can consume historical content that provides context and stuff like that. But when you get into like political discourse, I just like, I need a minute because it's just stressing me out.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, as I was telling you earlier, I went deep down the rabbit hole, and I have no regrets. I do believe that Pete Hegseth did have a smear, and I've always stood by that. It doesn't mean I stand by every single thing that one particular side believes or feels, but in his case, I researched that issue, and as somebody in the media profession, I thought I had a voice there, so I went with it, but. Definitely can say that if that's all you're consuming and that's all you're reading on is political content, you will your mental health will get affected. I will say that.
And the reason why I think it is, like, I've been talking to my wife and a few other people a lot about this. It's just like there's this shortage of critical thinking ability amongst the general population of the United States, it seems like, and even amongst like the political commentators and the people you'll see, which I mean, some of that is probably money based and there's other reasons why, like a CNN anchor is doing it because they're getting paid millions of dollars, not necessarily because they don't have critical thinking skills. But I think both are probably true. But like it's the more and more I just see people that are either unwilling or unable, and it's probably the second one. They're like unable to hold two like diametrically opposing points in their mind at the same time. Like they can't think about, like, for instance, and I'm using it as an example, but I'm not going to go down a political rabbit hole. They can't think to themselves like, what happened on October 7th was terrible and Israel was wronged in a huge way, but also the Palestinians are getting massacred and it's a genocide. And it's like, both things are true. There's fault on both sides. It's incredibly complicated. The issue goes back like 1,000 years or more. And it's like, but everybody, like, it seems like so many people are, one, unwilling to do any research to try to understand it. And two, even if they're presented with the information, they're just like unwilling to hold the two opposing thoughts in their mind at the same time. They just pick one and they feel compelled to pick one.
They pick a side and then they argue about it.
And they're like an absolutist.
I know.
And it's just
there's no middle ground.
Yeah,
of it. It's just terrible. But before we get started, I definitely want to play the intro from my dear old dad who introduces the show, Charlie Pickard. So hold on just one more.
From the moment we're born and lock eyes with our parents, we are inspiring others. By showing up as a vessel of service, we not only help others, we help ourselves. Welcome to S.O.S, Stories of Service, hosted by Teresa Carpenter, here from ordinary people from all walks of life who have transformed their communities by performing extraordinary work.
And for those of you, he did that for my first show. So it was very special and was my first guest. So as I said, we are sitting down today with DGUTS. He is a retired Master Chief Petty Officer with 21 years of experience in the submarine service. Through his distinguished career, he served in critical leadership roles, including division and departmental leading Chief Petty Officer, Command Career Counselor, and Senior Enlisted Leader of CSA School. His experience spans naval military training, supply management, and equal opportunity, making a lasting impact on those he served with. Since retiring in September 2022, DGUTS has embarked on a new mission, which is pursuing a graduate degree in counseling with the goal of becoming a licensed mental health counselor for veterans. Today, we're going to talk basically just everything: transition from military service, mental health advocacy, challenges veterans face, and the importance of a support system in post-military life. Welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pumped to be here. I like being the guest. I always say it at the beginning of these. Like, I'm normally the podcast guy, like the host. So it's fun to not have the weight of all of the things, and I can just answer questions and talk. So,
oh, I know. It's like one side pushes kind of the conversation along and sort of drives, and then the other side just answers the questions and jumps in. So it's nice to have that. But I always love having fellow podcasters or fellow communicators on my show, because sometimes those are just the most diciest conversations, because those of us in the communication field, we understand how to bring forth ideas. And so it just makes it an interesting conversation. But a little bit of your backstory. Tell me a little bit about where you were born and raised and what inspired you to join the Navy.
Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan, Detroit metro area, not Detroit proper. We were about 45 minutes outside of this actual city, but I was born in a town called Livonia. My dad worked for the school system growing up and retired from there. And then we moved a little further out as I think we were teenagers when we ended up where we lived. And my parents still live there. They're just in like a senior living home. But yeah, I joined the military. There was a lot of reasons, but I was in college at Michigan State University when September 11th happened. And that was that pushed me over the edge, but I was already looking at it because my brother had been in the Navy since, I think he joined in like 98, 99. And he was on the TR. So like the shots of the carrier leaving on September 12th, 2001, my brother was on the flight deck. And so there was that. Like, I remember attending his boot camp graduation when I was like 16, and it was like crack. I was like, I want to do this. And that I always had a romanticized idea of military service just in my head, because you watch movies like Pearl Harbor was big back then, and I would probably watch Men of Honor like 100 times. And there was something about it that I was just like, I was really into it. And I have a really deep history of service in my family on both sides. My mom's side primarily Marines. So like my grandfather was a Marine in World War II. He's the youngest sergeant major in the history of the Marine Corps, because and a large part of that was just death-based attrition in World War II. But he's a sergeant major in 6 years, and he was a scout sniper, and just crazy career. I've got a photo album of him standing, or one, he wasn't standing next to him, but Churchill like toured their training area. I think they were in like Norway, doing like cold weather training, and there's pictures of Churchill, and I've got this crazy photo album with that and all his,
so
anyway.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah. And so Marines on my mom's side, and like all my uncles on my mom's side are Vietnam Marines. And then on my dad's side, everybody was Navy. Like my grandfather was in the Navy in World War II. My dad was in the Navy in Vietnam. My brother was in the Navy when September 11th happened. And then that was what pushed me Navy. It was, my dad was in the Navy. My brother was in the Navy. I just I wanted to make my dad proud. And I was watching Men of Honor on repeat. So there you go.
I love it. Absolutely love it. I mean, that's really how people get involved usually. I mean, my story is unique that I didn't have anybody serving other than my father, who was drafted in the Army, but he never really talked about it. But typically we see the story like yourself, where it is something that runs in the family. And that's why it is so important to leave the service in a good way, and show your children what good service is all about, because we really want to be able to pass this love of serving in the military to future generations. So important. So you joined the Navy, and were you in the submarine force initially?
No, I joined the Navy to be a hospital corpsman. I like every 18-year-old male that joins the Navy, they want to be a Navy SEAL when they grow up. But growing up and hearing stories from Vietnam era Marines, or just stories of them, they weren't super forthcoming because they all saw combat. And but I heard a lot of stories kind of about the effects that it had. Like my mom has this crazy story where my now late uncle, he was a Marine in Vietnam, saw a lot of action, made it home, and always had a hard time dealing with it. And she she told me the story of my grandma had my mom go wake him up for lunch, and she just walks in to wake up her brother and touches him and shakes him, and he like lurches out of bed and starts choking her until she almost passed out because he thought Charlie was in his tent, you know. And it's just like,
wow,
it's those types of effects. I was kind of aware of them, and then my uncle passed from, essentially he had a cocaine habit that killed him before, I think he was like 42. And you know, I can only assume that was played into like him trying to deal with all that stuff before mental health awareness and services were what they are now. So it was kind of like I had these cautionary tales, and so when I joined, I was like, let me be a corpsman and I'll go work with the Marines and see what that's like. Cause I knew when I knew enough about when I was joining to know that if I was a FMF corpsman, I was probably going to see some action, you know, like it was that time, like when everything was spinning up and Iraq hadn't happened yet, but it was about to. And, but I figured, I was like, let me do that. And if I can do that and I'm successful at it, then I'll try to do buds. Right. But none of that ever happened. So in boot camp, I had a marijuana waiver when I joined the military, and I was forthcoming about everything. So I was thinking that this might be a career. And so I wasn't one of those dudes lying to the recruiter about smoking weed or anything. Like I was forthcoming about everything because I didn't want anything to come up later, like in a background check or something. And so at the moment of truth in boot camp, they handed us our service records and said, if there's anything you didn't tell us, blah, 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 or something's messed up, or tell us now. And my record said alcohol abuse on it. I'm like, well, that's not true. I never drank alcohol in my life. So I was just like, I raised my hand and said, hey, there's an error. I have a drug waiver for marijuana. It was a one-time waiver. But I had said I smoked marijuana twice ever with my brother. And they explained the one-time waiver as you can only do this once because you're a corpsman. You can't have two drug waivers. So if you had a second drug waiver as a corpsman, you get disqualified, right? Because access to narcotics and all that. The whole time, I'm like clear on it, and I thought I understood it, right? And so then, at the moment of truth, they said, "So how many times did you smoke marijuana?" I said the same thing I told my recruiter. I said the same thing I told everybody else at MEPS and shit. And then so then I said twice, and that's not what this says recruit. And then it just all went downhill from there. And so they said they had to give me a second drug waiver, like a separate second drug waiver, to make it say what it should have said all along. And that disqualified me from being a corpsman.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, in boot camp, mind you. So I have to reclassify in boot camp. And I had a really high ASVAB score. Like, I know, like, as a cook, people just assume that you don't, but I had a very high ASVAB score. They wanted me to be a nuke and stuff. And so I had to go see a classifier about reclassifying, and they were trying to make me a CT or an IS or something with computers or anything. And because I had high ASVAB score, we'll give you a $25,000 bonus and all this other stuff. And I was panicking because all I had access to was those little rating descriptions in the Blue Jackets manual, and that's it. It's not like they're letting me do internet research,
right. Like you have no idea what you're
right, or talk to anybody that does the job or any of that. So I had cooked professionally before I joined the military, and I loved it. And I thought I might go back to it after I got out of the military, but it wasn't my plan for the military. I wanted an adventure. I wanted to do something different. But in that moment, I just retreated to what I knew. And I said, no, I want to be a mess management specialist. And the look on the classifier's face, like, are you sure? And I was just like, dude, I know I'm good at it, and I know I like it. And so I end up at MSA school at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. And boy, is that an adventure, because we show up and the cabbie doesn't know any better, but the ones that have base access, so they take us to beautiful new building. There's sailors outside. I'm like, wow, this is a really nice place we're about to be in for 4 weeks or whatever it was. And some second class walks up to the cab and goes, "You guys here for MAA school?" I'm like, "No, MS." They're like, "Oh, you guys are on the ghetto side of base," and they point us to the Medina annex. And so we go over there, and it's this little like tiny annex, like it's just like little tiny base annex that isn't attached to the main base. And we pull up in front of this just like hovel of a barracks, like just a shithole. And we're like, awesome. And so we all get out, and it was
Oh no.
it was like the Goonies of A schools. Like, it was just such a fucking, it was dramatic. It was a shit show, but it was fun. At one point we didn't have doors on our, like, they removed the doors from the barracks rooms because people were getting in trouble and girls were like sneaking into guys' rooms and stuff. And it was just ridiculous, but it was fun. And like, I look back on it with fond memories, but it was kind of ridiculous. But I did really well in A school. And while I was there, the guy running it was a submariner. And he came into the classroom one day and basically gave us hey, you'll make more money. You get to make better food. You get to do more things, and just sold it in a way that I was like, well, I wanted an adventure and I want to do something cool. And like, this sounds cool. Like, this sounds like something that I would really enjoy. And, you know, like the whole of my context was like Hunt for Red October, and, you know, that's probably it. Like, just like movies.
Yeah.
And
You
I
just
was just
didn't
like,
know.
yeah, I'm like that. But I also was just like, little I did know, I was like, this is cool. I'm like, I'm doing this. And so I volunteered and ended up at sub school, and the rest is history.
Well, the thing is that like, you didn't really know anything. And that's the problem with all of us back in the days when there was no internet, or it wasn't like you could just find somebody that did that job. You really had to go off of a 1-paragraph description. I remember the same thing when I was going for AE. I was like, I had to read like all the different aviation ratings, and I actually wanted to be an aviation ordnanceman because it was like bombs, and that's gonna be cool. And yeah, but I was only talked into AE because people told me that that AOs wouldn't be able to get a job on the outside. Like, there wasn't going to be anything for me. So you know, AE was probably a better choice. But to your point about MS, for the people who are watching and are not Navy, there are certain job ratings, sadly, because a chef or a cook in a fine restaurant is a very prestigious position.
Right.
But unfortunately, in the Navy, like boatman's mate, not to slam those 2 ratings, but for some reason they're kind of like the I hate to use that word, but the ghetto like of the ratings, and people are like, oh, don't do that job.
And apparently, I perceived it to be a Navy-wide thing. Apparently, it's a lot worse on submarines. So like, you are redheaded stepchildren on submarines. On aircraft carriers, it's not quite like, it exists, but it's not even close to what it is on submarines. And I just always took for granted that it was, but they're not like I'd be in chiefs meetings. So like, remove all the junior enlisted people. I'm in chiefs meetings with like smart people, and they know me really well. And like, something would come up, like, and we're talking like, we're planning for like future operations and stuff. And I'm a department chief, so I'm at this meeting, or I'm at the ops brief itself, and I'll mention something, and like, a grown man that is like a senior chief or master chief goes, "What do you know about it, Cookie?" And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Really? And then then I would do what I do and come at them sideways. Why are you so defensive? Why are you so defensive? And it's like, because why? What do you think? Why do you think I'm so defensive? Like, maybe, just maybe, it's because you guys will never shut the fuck up and actually just take me seriously based on merit. And like, because not for nothing, I was the smartest person in the room in a lot of rooms I was in, and not always. There were some brilliant dudes. I worked with this guy, Mark Stewart, he was my EDMC. He's probably the smartest person I've ever met in my life. Like, he was a brilliant human being. The guy should be in a fucking think tank or somewhere solving the world's problems. But like, I could keep up with most people. Mark, I knew, was intellectually superior. And there were other guys like that where I would fully admit, like, that dude's way smarter than me. But like, I'm not dumb. I'm not even close. And they knew that too, which was what was so stupid. It was like, they get indoctrinated culturally on submarines from day one to cooks are stupid.
To think that, and to have that in their mind. And it doesn't matter who the person is that's in that position. They're just going to automatically associate that with the rating.
Well, and what's interesting is it's race-based, but people don't know it. And I say that, like, give me a second to explain, because obviously I'm pasty white. But there's a great book called The Messman Chronicles that it was a retired corpsman chief that was African-American, did the research and wrote the book. And he set out to write a book on the history of African-American service in the Navy, right? It turns out it's all pretty much tied up in commissarymen, officer stewards, ship's cooks, like that whole lineage of people. And he wrote this really incredible book. And the way that really short version of it is they were initially recruiting out of the Philippines when it was still a U.S. territory in the early 1900s for service-based ratings, because they viewed it was like a racial discrimination thing. They viewed them as servants. They're good for being servants, and that's it. And then when it was clear we were going to lose the Philippines to Imperial Japan, they said, we'll just start recruiting African Americans out of the South because they're well suited to being servants too, for obvious reasons, right? It was just them being racist.
So
and
fascinating.
Right. And then they started doing that. So then for a long time, the rating was essentially racially segregated by splitting it into stewards and commissarimen. So commissarimen were the white guys, or like, you know, the non-brown guys. And then everybody else was officer stewards and I think it was just officer stewards at the time. I'd have to look it up.
Or these like the differences, like those would be the people that would work like the wardroom versus the people that would work like the mess decks.
Sort of, but they were in whatever would be classically perceived as a servant role. So yes, like serving the higher ups, it would be one of those things, but so would cleaning up after them and like preparing their uniforms and the types of things like a house slave
like a housekeeper
would be doing.
Would do. Yeah.
Well, like the house slave, like so on a plantation in the South in the 1800s, it's like the house slave, like the person that would not the one out picking cotton, the one in the house doing all the servant things. They kind of were like a nanny. They were the cook. They were kind of everything. And so it's kind of like that. Those types of roles, they were the officer stewards. And then the commissarymen were they were the guys doing like in charge of the food inventory and
so more like the supply officer.
Cooking. And cooking the food for the crew, right, was a lot of them too. But like there were still stewards doing that as well. But like, and I'm not going to claim to be a high level expert on exactly where they were serving or anything like that, but they were effectively racially segregated. And then it was in like 70 something that Zumwalt talked to. So have you ever read Navigating the Seven Seas with the Melvin G. Williams and his I think it's Melvin G. Williams and Melvin something else Williams, but it's like the dad was a commissaryman master chief that worked at the Pentagon when Zumwalt was CNO, and Zumwalt would come and talk to him about equal opportunity stuff and get his like experience or like advice or whatever on those types of issues. And he was basically responsible for the merging of the rating in like, I think it was 72 or 4 or something, where it became mess management specialist because they merged officer stewards and commissarymen, and it was a big thing. Everybody's freaking out, blah blah. But like integrating the rating was like a huge deal, and that guy was mainly responsible for it. But then when you just look at the culture, like, because none of these submariners that get indoctrinated in this could tell you why cooks are stupid. They'll blame it on the ASVAB score, like the threshold for picking that rating being low, but it's low for a bunch of it's low for LSs and RS, like it's low for a bunch of ratings, admin jobs, like, so they'll use that as a convenient excuse because they don't know and they have to point at something. But really, when you do the research, they've been discriminated against for the whole time the Navy's existed, essentially. And so, like, I think that stigma has just carried on. You know what I mean? Like, we're looked down upon because we're supposed to. You know?
Do you think generationally too, if somebody knows somebody like you did in your family too, if you knew somebody that did this job in the Navy, then you will tell your friends or your family members. You'll push them into those areas. So, how many submarines did you serve on while you were on active duty?
3. I did. It was. So the first one was out of Pearl Harbor. It was the Louisville, which is now decommissioned. And then Jimmy Carter, which is a special project submarine. That's where I made chief. And then the last one was a ballistic missile submarine called the Louisiana that's out here in Washington. And then I did a flag staff and then retired. So
gotcha. So when did you start your podcast and all this? Were you active duty when you started?
I was. Yeah. No, I was.
Really?
Yeah. So I was an A school instructor. That was my second shore duty. And so I went there as a chief, made senior chief towards the end, but I was the senior enlisted leader the last year I was there. And basically what was happening was we kept getting students reaching back. So we would put about 1,500 on average through the schoolhouse a year. And students would reach back and they'd either have questions about how to deal with their leaders, because they would have like a second class or a first class LPO type that was just a tyrant, and they didn't understand what was happening, and they didn't understand what they were doing wrong, because early on, most people take all those things personally because they haven't figured out how to separate, one from the other. Like, and the leadership incompetence that is rampant within all of the leadership in the Navy. Those leaders don't know how to deal with people either. And so they would reach back asking questions about how to deal with those types of people, or they would get thrust into early leadership positions. So like the most typical was if they made third class kind of quick and they were pretty sharp in picking up the rating and qualifying, they would get put in charge of a watch section as a galley watch captain as a third class, which is pretty normal, as like either an assistant or the full watch captain. And so when that would happen, they're just like, oh God, I went from being just one of the group to being a peer of these people to being like a supervisor. And they wouldn't know how to deal with that, how to talk to these people, how to earn trust, how to get them to listen to them, especially when they had just been their peer. Their other peer would just be like, nah, you're still my peer. Fuck off. Right. Like, I'm going to do what I want. And so they were confused. And so we would get a lot of these messages, like a ton of, even not just me, like all the other instructors too would get a lot of messages. And I was answering so many of them on like Facebook Messenger, or more commonly just my work email, that because there was a policy that came out while I was there, where the DOD instruction, where they have that rule where it's like you have to wait 6 months before being in contact with these people, which I'm not going to lie, I didn't follow that at all, just because these kids, if a sailor asks me for help, I'm fucking helping them. I don't give a shit what this but anyway, like they were trying to avoid fraternization, which I understand, and like that's not what was happening with me. And so I was just like, whatever, man.
Yeah.
But
people out. Yep.
Yeah. And so like when it kept happening, I just started thinking about like, what can I do? Because this was taking up a lot of my time. And I'm like, what can I do to make a resource that I can point to, like where I can just make a force multiplier? Like if I can create some type of a resource or find one, even I wasn't married to the idea of me doing it. Even I was just like, I need a resource I can point to that would be beneficial and like something static, that it doesn't require me, like my attention span. If I create a podcast and I just leave it there, you can access that whenever you want. I could be asleep. And so I was trying to find some way to create like a repository of information and resources for these sailors. And so I was thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, the more I had arrived at, I don't want my face and name on it while I'm on active duty, because it felt unprofessional. It felt it also, it was, the unprofessional piece was a big piece, but really the bigger one for me was if I create something, like if I was doing YouTube, it'd be incredibly easy for all these junior sailors. Mind you, I'm a chief at the time, so there's like a default level of distrust going into any encounter with a junior sailor, just because I'm wearing khakis. But also, if there was any way for a sailor consuming whatever this resource was going to be, if there's a way for them to point at it and say I was doing it for any other reason than to help them, right? Like if I was doing it for an eval bullet or self-aggrandizement or whatever, like an ego stroke, whatever they wanted to try to paint me as, like, hey, he's just doing this to get an EP or an award.
I always wondered why you left your name off everything. That makes total sense. That's
why. I mean, it's more symbolic now because I'm retired and who cares, but I'll say my name too. If like I've been on podcasts where like when I was on Permission to Speak Freely, Damo would call me Will, and it's like, that's fine. I don't care anymore.
Right.
But when I was on active duty, that's what it was. I didn't want sailors. I wanted them to trust it. And I was aiming it at junior sailors primarily just because of that context of A school students. I basically looked at the number of people reaching back that we had. I'm like, it stands to reason if it's happening with CSs, it's happening with it. Like this is happening to everyone. Like every sailor that is joining the Navy, the first few years, they're finding these problems and difficulty adjusting and understanding their leadership and blah, blah, blah.
What year did you start it?
2013, I think. Oh, or no, 2016. I'm sorry. It was towards the end of my time at the A school. So yeah, 2016. So I've been doing it
9 years. Oh my God.
Almost 10. Yeah.
So when you started it, did anyone else have a podcast that was military?
Not that I'm aware of. I can't say no. I've been listening to Jocko's podcast for a really long time. He might have been around back then. I want to say he was.
But I don't know if he was on active duty. He was
No, he started it after he retired, but
yeah, I'm saying
it
in
was,
active duty. Like, are
oh,
you like I wonder if
I
you are the
doubt
first
it.
active duty
Maybe.
Navy podcaster. I bet you might be.
It's possible. I don't know for sure, but I'm the only one I know of. So like back
Right.
then, and I started it then because I basically like I settled on a podcast because it was the only thing that met all those requirements that I had, but also that a big motivation was I'm like, I need to reach sailors where they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where are they most of the time? Looking at their fucking phone in the smoke pit or whatever, right? But looking at their phone. And so I'm like, what can I do? Because like YouTube is the logical answer, but I'm like face and name, can't do that. So I was like, it's got to be a podcast. It just has to. It was right around when Joe Rogan was starting to become enormous. And I modeled a lot of my approach off of him. More I'm going to do whatever I think is the right thing. And listener, audience, clicks, likes, be damned. I don't,
You don't care.
Not a thing. Yeah. I just don't give a shit.
And
like follow me or don't.
Yeah.
I still don't. Like I had a guy the other day on social media when I released the McPon Smith episode that he's like, how you don't have a bigger following is beyond me. And I'm like, oh, it's not beyond me. I 100% know why. And it's because one, I'm fucking terrible at social media and like leveraging the algorithm and all that. I do my best. I've watched a lot of videos. I've done a lot of research.
Right.
But
I just don't think you care. You don't put your effort or your time into it. It's not
right.
why you're here. I'm the same way.
That's not why I'm doing it. And it's
right.
like I think it'll get to the people that need it naturally. And that's like
that's what you want.
It seems to be working, I guess. Yeah.
Oh my God. Some of your shows have blown up so much. And that's what's interesting about your content is that it's very similar to mine, where you have a certain guest or you touch on a certain issue and then it's just like, woo. And then you go back to your regular other stuff and it's like,
yep. Same.
A little
bit. And like I've never chased that like metrics or anything because I just don't care. And I never, like, it would be cool if this became my full-time job, but I thought there was potential for it to be. And so I started to kind of treat it like a business when I retired, but it didn't, I was going through a lot, which I did. I'm sure we'll get to transition later, but like when I retired, I had a really hard time. I went through a lot at the very end of my career, and then retiring was a shock that I wasn't prepared for. Like, so
I actually do want to, we can transition to that real quick because I remember when I did your show, I was like, oh, I remember like filing that into my mind that there's a backstory on how you got out and what happened. So tell me a little bit about what happened towards the end of your career.
Sure. So like it wasn't in my mind, it wasn't the end of my career. I was approaching 20 years. I was on my third shore duty, and so I'm a senior chief up for master chief. I was almost done with my COB card, which is like the CMC on a submarine for those uninitiated. And so in my mind, next stop is my fourth submarine to be the chief of the boat. And then that would logically progress into CMC jobs and stuff. That's what I had always dreamed of doing. And in March of 2020, when everybody else was trying to figure out what COVID is and why it matters, I was diagnosed with a rare form of brain cancer. And that was a misadventure for me because I just went to the doctor finally. I avoided medical. Like I was just like, I'm not missing deployment. I'm not going to make my job somebody else's problem. I'd have to be bleeding out my eyeballs to go to medical. But I was having an increasingly hard time with my energy levels because I didn't sleep well, and I was snoring really bad. And all the Jimmy Carter chiefs would tell me even back then, like, you need to get a sleep study done. So at the end of my time on Louisiana, we were going to the shipyard. And so like when you go to the shipyard, I mean, I'm shutting the galley down, I'm replacing equipment and the floor and everything. So it's like, we don't got anything going on. And I was going to transfer not 6 months into that shipyard period. So I went to my doc and asked for a consult to ENT because I knew I had a badly deviated septum. And I was like, let me get this fixed now so I can sleep, so that I can spend the shore duty kind of like getting back in shape and focusing on my physical and mental health and be ready to be a COB at the end of that. Little did I know that was going to lead to it. I mean, it was like Naval Hospital was like, got imaging, and they were just like, yeah, we'll totally fix your deviated septum. They got the imaging, and they're like, it's a little more complicated than we thought. There's something growing up there. it's probably just a benign growth, no big deal. So, but they sent me to like the big Army hospital to get a rhinoplastation to look at it. And so I go there, have an appointment with them. It's no big deal. We'll just fix your nose, take that out at the same time. It's fine. I show up for the surgery. I'm in my gown. They got an IV in me for anesthesia. And some Army captain walks in and goes, actually, we're not going to do the surgery. We're just going to take a large tissue sample because you might have cancer. And I was like, really? This is the first time this shit is coming up? And then 6 days later, I had a rare form of brain cancer. And then it was so obscure that they sent me to the University of Washington because they were the only medical center in the area that was even aware of it or studying it or whatever. So I went there and treatment began. And so that in and of itself was terrifying. But they told me, basically, like, we're 98% chance or better, we're going to cure you and you're never going to have another issue again with cancer. And I was just like, oh, all right. But the brain surgery was terrifying because they were going to go through my nose to get it out. So they just like kind of cut the barrier at the back of your sinuses. And because it was growing on my olfactory nerve, which is like your smell nerve, but it comes down from your brain. And the tumor was growing up into my brain. And so they were like, we'll go that way because it's a logical path. But if we get in there and it's more complicated than we thought, they were going to have to split me ear to ear, pull my face down, cut my forehead out, let my brain relax back and go through this way. And so I'm freaking out. I'm like, if that happens, I could die. Like, legitimately, something could go wrong and I could die. And so I was panicking, and it all happened because of COVID. All the rules were changing. It was a like airborne disease that was communicated through particles from your sinuses and stuff. So it was like the worst possible place for it to be. And they were freaking out because they're like, they might tell us we can't do surgery soon, so we need to get you in yesterday. And so it was like, I found out I had cancer, and 4 days later I got brain surgery. So I had that much time to process it. And me and my wife got legally married because I was trying to get a will done really quickly. And the LNC that worked at the Flagstaff was like, is your family crazy? I'm like, no. She's like, so they're not going to try to come after your stuff if you die? And I'm like, no, they don't care. She's like, just get married and all your stuff will default to your wife. And I was like, oh, all right. And we were already engaged, so we just went and got legally married so that just in case, you know.
Yep.
And so all that happened in that 4-day period.
Oh my
and then
God,
I got brain
that's
surgery.
stressful.
But when I was on the other side of brain surgery, I was like, oh, I'm good now. Like, I wasn't scared of anything once I knew the surgery went well. And I just had to do radiation therapy for, I think it was 6 or 8 weeks. And the way they described that was like, it's at the beginning, it's going to kind of be whatever, but then the symptoms, it's kind of a snowball effect. Like, it builds inertia over time, the more treatments you get. And so it got pretty gnarly, like 3/4 of the way in, where I just had really bad burns and bruising everywhere. And I had like sores in my mouth. So I was on a liquid diet for like 3 weeks and lost like 30 pounds. It was miserable, but they described it to me that way. I'm like, that sounds like deployment. I could do that standing on my head. Like, fucking let's go. So like, once I was done with brain surgery, I was not consciously worried about anything related to cancer.
Right.
But I go in for the, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think there's also something about when you've gone through something really, really freaking hard, and then people keep throwing, or something keeps throwing itself at you more, because you've already done the really hard thing. Everything else is like, okay, I can take it.
Right. And so that was my mindset going into it. Right. But then day one, very first radiation treatment. So you go in, you leave, you feel exactly the same. And I felt better than I had in a decade because I didn't have a giant cancerous tumor blocking my airway anymore. And they did fix my deviated septum while they were in there. So like, I could breathe. I was sleeping better. I felt great. I come out of that first radiation treatment. As soon as the car door closes, I just start ugly crying. And my wife's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm not worried about anything. I'm not scared of this cancer anymore. I just, from that moment and for like the next 6 months, I just like could not control my emotions. I was having panic attacks. I was like snapping at my wife and everyone else that had dared interact with me. I was just this miserable human. But it was kind of easy to ignore because I think my wife just shrugged it off as like, he's going through radiation therapy. Like, it's terrible. but then when I finished, and you have a couple of months where same thing, like you build the inertia, you got to let it bleed off. So like I was in miserable shape for 6 weeks after radiation. But a couple months post radiation, I start going back to work for like half days. Like, so really my biggest problem is like fatigue still. And I'm still just this miserable human, like just snapping at people, just being a jerk, like especially, and it was mainly my wife because that's who sees me the most. And so she drew a line in the sand and was like, hey, like you don't have a valid reason to be like this anymore. So you need to figure this shit out because this ain't going to work for me. And I was like, oh, all right. So then next day I talked to my IDC on the Flagstaff. He's a Master Chief Corpsman, and just kind of closed the door behind him because I grew up in a Navy where mental health treatment was taboo.
Me too.
You'd lose your clearance. You'd get kicked off the boat. You'd get all the things that I was always terrified of. So I went and closed the door behind him somewhere and just said, hey, man, what does it look like for me to see mental health? And what are the effects on me and all that? And so he was immediately like, he was the perfect dude because he his career, he worked with like the Marine. They weren't called Raiders at the time because they changed that name, or it was like the Scout Snipers or I forget the fucking name, but like Marine Special Forces and stuff. He did that as a corpsman. So like he had seen some shit and he had already gotten mental health treatment. And so he was already like well-versed on it and an advocate of it. And so he was like the perfect dude to talk to. And he's a really good friend of mine. He's a great dude. But so that kind of started the ball rolling on that. So I got into therapy. I spent 6 months in therapy and then I was sleeping well for the first time in my life. I felt fucking incredible. All the things had effectively been dealt with and I was doing really well. And then it was February of 2021. So this is like, probably, what would that be? Almost 2 years after cancer. I think I did that math right, but it's about to be 2022. So yeah. And my brother and 2 nieces were killed. And it was like killed in a way that, one, I'll never know what actually happened, like Netflix true crime documentary shit. And 2, it was my 40, I think he was 41 at the time. I'd have to do the math, but so he's young, healthy, like that makes 0 sense. And then the girls are like, I think 13 and 9 or 14. I think she just turned 14. So 14 and 9. So like, it's not like your grandparents passing away where it's like, you can compute that.
Right.
One, I couldn't compute that those people were gone because it didn't make any sense for that kind of a reason. But then 2, it was like the not knowing what happened and it happening in a way that made it basically, it's hard to explain without saying this out loud. So I'm just going to say it, even though I fucking hate talking about this, but the cops thought it was murder-suicide and basically thought my brother had killed my 2 nieces and then killed himself. I fucking refuse to believe that that's true. And the main reason is like, if you knew him at all, like his whole life was these girls, and like he was the best dad I've ever seen in real life. And that includes my own father, who's my fucking hero. Like my brother, it's hard to explain, but like just watching him with the girls, it was like, he was the fucking most patient, loving father I've ever seen in real life. And so the idea that could be true, I'm just like, I'm unwilling to accept that. And so and there's no way to know, like what happened. And the cops weren't very forthcoming with us, which was fucking ridiculous. And the whole thing is just,
I'm sorry.
Anyway. So that I was on limb the last 6 months of my career for mental health because of that event.
Well, that's incredibly stressful and awful. And especially if you're not feeling like you're getting the answers during the investigation that you think are satisfying to what you think happened. I mean,
right. It was
tough.
Yeah. It was just a fucking mess all around. And like, it's not like I was great. Like it wasn't like everything was fixed, but I felt better than I felt better than I ever had in my life. And it was just like, and I remember this very vivid moment that I always describe just because it's like a photograph in my mind of like, I'd been doing jujitsu and it's really difficult. And I started when I was 38 and like, I'm not athletic and I'm not resilient physically. So like, it was really difficult for me to do that and not quit. But like, I had gotten to this point where like that week I had been there every day of the week, like 5 days straight. It was a Friday and I was pumping gas right after I had left jiu-jitsu, and I felt incredible. And I was like, I should feel like I was in a car accident right now. Like, how do I feel so good? And I just remember kind of like having this moment where like I finally figured it out, you know, like I'm finally sleeping like a normal person, and I finally feel like I have the energy of a normal person, and I can do things physically and still be okay. And like I felt like I could have went back to jiu-jitsu and done a whole nother class. And that, as I'm thinking that thought, is when everything's happening. And I got the phone call the next morning, and I was just like, it was surreal. And it was like, I don't know. It's still nuts to me that it's like, it was almost like the simulation overlords just were like, you're getting too happy. Whoosh, you know,
right.
Like,
We're going to kick you down a notch.
You gotta blow your life up again.
Right.
And,
but for you to be able to find that treatment too, by the way, there's a lot of people that go through therapy that just don't get the right therapist, and they don't get the right care. I mean, I've had hit or miss my career. I've had some therapists that were wonderful, some that were not. Same. And you're always kind of just rolling your dice.
I was
don't know.
Spectacularly lucky with the guy that I got at Naval Hospital Bremerton. I was told that, like, a bunch of my friends were like, you don't have to just accept the therapist you get. If you don't vibe with the guy, just ask for a different one or whatever. Or gal, I guess. I didn't know I was getting a dude. But I walked in, and it's this lieutenant that looks 13. Like, it looks like he just started growing facial hair. And I'm like, this is not going to work. Like, I immediately, I was just, my brain was like,
you were just biased. Yep.
But he was amazing. His name's Maxwell Anderson. I doubt he's listening, but if he is, like, the dude saved my life. And like, and
great.
He was absolutely fucking incredible at his job. And for me, I'm obviously biased. He was exactly what I needed, you know, and it was just, it was amazing. And he was my therapist that whole time. So like, after I was doing really well, and we were talking about me stopping therapy, and then that thing with my brother and the girls happened. And so then I started medication and all these other things, but I stayed in therapy until I retired. And then, the mental health stuff, it's never gone away. It's not something that because I kind of thought of it that way. Like, I'm just curing something. Like, I just have to work on this until it's gone.
No.
And then I think post my brother and the girls passing, that's when it became a thing where it's like, oh no, this is like a forever thing. Like,
totally.
I've tried to go off my meds a few times because I was just determined to not be on this medication for the rest of my life. Every time I've done it, it's been a disaster. And I've been in and out of therapy. Like, I got back in with a therapist. I don't know, it was probably 6 months ago, and she was. This poor lady should have been retired like 5 years ago. She was like senile. And so I was just like, okay, I'm not doing this again. I gave her like 2 sessions, I think. And after the second one, I was just like, I can't.
And because you've had good ones.
Yeah.
And you've had somebody that really is
well, and
you.
At this point, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I know just enough to be dangerous. So I'm just like, this is not how this is supposed to go. You know, like, this is not productive at all. So, but yeah, it's been like a constant thing where I'm always having to like manage it. And a lot of the things I do specifically to do that, like how we talked about curating our inputs earlier. I do that a lot. My wife will be like, hey, watch this video. I'm like, what is it? Like, and we've had a bunch of talks about like, you can't just show me anything. And I don't want to see some World Star video where people are beating each other up at a football game or something. Like, I don't want to see that. And so I just have to curate. And even like, I was trying to watch this Vietnam documentary on, I think it's on Max or something. And the stories the veterans are, I can't sit there and listen to this shit.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I actually disabled my Facebook the other day, and I did reactivate it, but then I kept it off my phone because
I've done that a few times. So I delete the app off my phone for a while because I just
can't. I need a break.
Yeah.
I just can't. And the problem is that like people feel, and I know it gets talked about a lot, but for some reason, people have just open license to say the worst things to one another on social media that they would just never say to your face or in a conversation. And if you got this person down and you sat down and had a conversation, you'd probably find that you and this person agreed on things, or you saw the human side or whatever.
Right.
But somehow this all goes out the window when they're leaving a nasty comment on social media.
God, you should see my YouTube comments. Holy shit. Like just the dumbest stuff. Like I got one the other day that was like, I don't think I can trust someone that doesn't know which like or what the front of the hat is or something, because I wear hats backwards all the time. I was just like, really? That's your metric for like if somebody's smart enough to listen to or not? Like, are you if you're gonna trust them? Like, are you fucking really? That says more about you than it does about me. And but it's just like you just get all kinds of this ignorant.
You just get really nasty things.
Yeah.
If you have an opinion. And it doesn't matter which side the opinion is on. It doesn't matter what it is about. If it is about something that is contentious, any subject that is contentious, you will have people come after you who don't agree with what you have to say, but instead of arguing with you on the merits of what you have to say,
there it
they
is.
attack
There
you
it is.
personally. They make fun of how you look, or they make fun of your professionalism, or they find some other way to insult you that has absolutely nothing to do with the subject at hand. It's just, it blows my mind, because I really did think before this whole thing happened to me with the stand that I recently took on an issue, I really did think like I could just talk my way through it. Like I thought I could just discuss my way through the issues and engage people politely and respectfully in the comments, even when they came at me. And I have now learned that you can't. You just have to block certain people. You have to not engage, and you have to just walk away from. I mean, I left an entire group on Saturday because of this, because it gets to a point where it just gets ugly. And if the people who are administrating the pages of these particular groups don't want to stop certain people from saying certain things because they just don't care, or they agree with the person, then it's not. I don't
liberally block people because I don't really care what you're saying. It's just, I did try to reason with most people, and I have had some success with it. I think the environment matters a lot. I no longer like respond or whatever to like
that's smart. I don't either. I don't respond to insulting comments anymore at all.
I don't respond to any comments unless they're friends. So like when I posted the reels for the MCPON episode, like you mentioned something and I liked it, and then like I responded to like Christina DiRienzo, who's a friend of mine. I responded to somebody else who I think Damo maybe, or somebody like, and I was like, it's a friend of mine. It's someone I know and love. And so I'm just like, those people I'll respond to because they're my friends. And not everybody listened to I did a podcast 3 months ago before I took a break, and basically said, if you need to get a hold of me, email me, because I'm not even checking DMs anymore that like religiously. Like I do sometimes. I at least look and see who's DMing me, but if I don't know who it is, I'm not reading it anymore. Like I'm just past that, and I can't deal with all the bullshit.
No,
and
I hear you.
With Reddit, I like when I would post stuff on Reddit, which I just posted there for the first time in a long time with the MCPON episode, but I would get comments in the Reddit posts and Reddit threads where people would be real combative and immediately come at me sideways because I'm a chief, or because I was talking to a chief, or because it was about a chief issue or whatever. Just something that they decide immediately. They would make all these assumptions and take all these leaps, just autofill all the context instead of actually listening to the episode. And in the comment section, instead of like being combative, I'd be like, well, did you listen to the episode? Like, or I would because a lot of times I'd get comments where it would be like, it would say something about like making an assumption about the content of the podcast, and then taking a position that I take in the podcast that they didn't listen to. And so I'm just like, and then what it would ended up happening as I got a bigger following was the Reddit people in our Navy with the Reddit thread, the subreddit, they would come to my defense before I even got there. They're like, all the people, all the listeners that have been down for a while and know who I am.
Right.
They're like, you clearly didn't listen to the podcast, you idiot. And so they would beat up on these people before I even got there to say anything. And then, but the best one for me, like my favorite thing to do was always like, well, why don't you come on the podcast and we'll talk about it? Right. I'll talk to anybody about anything. And I do want to get away from doing a lot of long form interviews unless it's extremely relevant, like the McPond Smith one. I'm not going to not do that. I might skip Honey because I don't think he'd say anything interesting, but like Russ Smith, I've always liked. And so I was just like, this is a dude I want to talk to, and he's retired, so he's free to say what he wants. And I feel like there were interesting events that happened during his tenure, that like the GW all hands call thing we talked about, and like all this other stuff. But it, like, I'll say like, hey, why don't you come talk to me about it on the podcast? And I've had some people do it. Like this guy, Dan, he's now retired, but he was a naval special warfare tech. And he was one of the people in the comment section where he said something, and it wasn't like crazy. It was just like, he was pushing back. And I think he assumed some things at the time, if I remember correctly. And so I came back. I didn't come back with vitriol and defensiveness. I came back with, well, that's an interesting point. Why do you feel that way? And say, I've had that happen a few times with other people that ended up like coming on the podcast and becoming like friends, or like, at least like listeners, you know? And so, I used to think that was the way. And I think on Reddit, you can do that. I don't think in social media comment sections or Facebook groups or anything like that's ever going to work. You know?
Well, it would work in certain groups if the administrative people would set the tone. And
I don't know if that's true.
But maybe not.
I think there's something inherent in Facebook groups that grow too large, like Basic Mentoring or the Ask the Chief group, which I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but it's been around for like 3 or 4 years, I think. And it got huge really quickly because they allowed everybody to like, once you were in it, you could invite in whoever you want. Like you could just add anyone. And so it grew really, really quickly and rapidly degenerated into just a dumpster fire of like really unimpressive people saying really unimpressive things when a junior sailor would ask a question, which the fucking group title is Ask the Chief. The whole purpose of it is for people to be able to ask questions, get mentorship, etc. And they would ask a question and all these people would be like, did you even open the book, you idiot? Like, how do you not know this? Blah, blah. And they'll just start attacking.
That's terrible.
And then people like me will come at them sideways in the comments like, hey, dumbass, this is the whole point of the group. Why don't you just help? And if you're not going to help, go away. And then, but then it's just bickering. And then the sailor doesn't ever get the answer they came for.
And the thing too is like all that negativity, it just impacts your mental health and your headspace. And so that's kind of where I started to fall on it with Facebook. I was like, whoa, this is like really impacting me. And this is not nice. And I'm not an attacker. Like I've never been a person that like, I never want to be that person that, okay, you hit me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make you feel just as shitty as you made me feel. Right. I fundamentally in every fiber of my being just don't agree or stand by that. And so I've just never been that person. So I think that makes me an easy target for certain people. Yeah. And because I won't hit them back and they know that.
Yeah, I have like what I call a learned extroversion where I'm naturally an introvert. I've always been this way. And people don't believe me when I say it if they only know me through the podcast and stuff because, or if they had known me on active duty, because when I got put in a leadership position, it was like I had to learn how to deal with conflict and be proactive in advocating and defending advocating for and defending my sailors. And so it was like I just had to do it, or and like the subculture that is the Chiefs Mess is such that there's a pecking order. It's a hierarchy, and like everybody wants everything for themselves. They want their sailor to be Sailor of the Year. They want to have all the EPs. They want everything. And so you have to learn how to exist in that pecking order and peck back. You know, like you have to fight for everything.
I mean, I can hit back very directly, and I can be very blunt, and I can be, but I've just never been a, one, I'm not a screamer. And then number two, just by nature. And then number two, I'm just not a person that can get dirty and lodge acts. That's just never been my thing.
I learned how to do a lot of those. Like I can be petty. I don't like it, but I also
sometimes I wish I were a little more.
There's a line that some people will cross. At which point I'm burning the fucking boats. You know what I mean? Like, okay.
I know. There's times where I should.
And I think it's the submariner in me because we have this thing like if you go on it's like going to prison in a way where like if you go on a submarine, they will find whatever is your weakness, like whatever pisses you off or annoys you or whatever's going to trigger you, and they're going to push that fucking button as many times as they can until you learn that like you just can't react that way. Like that's it's just the culture of submarining. It's like if you let those things, like we have a saying, and I don't know if it's everywhere in the Navy, but on submarines, there's no such thing as too soon. Like you could have just come out of your captain's mast and you're going to start getting roasted, or you could have just like before we leave the room after a critique for fucking up maintenance or where somebody got removed from watch standing. Soon as the CO walks out of the room, the jokes start flying. And so it's just like, you don't get a chance to like put yourself back together.
Right.
We're kicking you while you're down and we're going to laugh about it. And so like, I think that's where a lot of it comes from with me, where like, I try really hard to not be that person, but there is a line that gets crossed at some point where I'm burning the fucking boats and we're just
going.
And you will not out petty me. Like I will destroy you. And I've just learned the value of being good at conflict so many times that I think sometimes I probably take it too far, but it's like, I don't know. Like there's something in me. It's an Irish temper thing, I think, maybe. Well, I don't know, but like,
I think once I'm retired, it will be really fun for me to be able to do a lot of it. Part of it with me is because I'm still on active duty because I am a PAO and held to this very high standard. I watch everything I say. I police myself in a way that I think if I wasn't in the middle, if I didn't have the job I do, and if I wasn't on active duty, I think that it would be really amazing for me to be able to hit back a little bit more. I just feel like I can't in the position.
It is. I definitely held back in a lot of areas when I was on active duty. I was critical of the Chiefs mess, but not like I am now. I would not. I've done episodes like where I was blasting the MCPON. I've done episodes where I've talked about like I think the Chiefs creed is absolute garbage, and I did at the challenge of a listener, because I critique it so much, I was challenged to like rewrite it, and so I did, and I released I read it on a podcast and released it as clips and got a lot of really great feedback
that's awesome
about it. But I've done a lot of things that I would have never dared done while on active duty.
That's a great question. And I know we got to wrap up soon, but I want to ask that. How was the transition between what you were able to do with your podcast and the way you were able to express yourself on active duty to, oh shoot, now I'm retired and I can really talk? Tell me a little bit about that.
So yeah, I was more focused on leadership development topics and being more educational for a long time. And then I started doing interviews, and a lot more things would come up that I felt kind of like duty bound to be honest about, but I still would hold back some because I always had these ideas in me where I wanted to be more aggressive in my critiques of the Chiefs mess, just because I thought there was so much stuff that needed to be pointed out and needed to be improved upon. And really a lot of it was just recognition that we had a problem in the first place. But transitioning out, there was a lot of times like when the Fitzgerald collision happened, or when the Captain Crozier was fired off the TR and it was like big news and everybody wanted me to talk about it. I'm like, nope, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Cause like, one, I don't have an investigation to like results. Like, I don't know what happened.
You don't know.
Maybe Captain Crozier should have got fired. I mean, now we know enough to know that that was complete bullshit, but at the time I didn't. And so, and while I suspected that he was probably on the right side of things, it was like, I'm not talking about that until I know a lot more. Fitzgerald and McCain collisions were the same thing. I need to see an investigation. I can't talk about this yet. And everybody wanted me to talk about it. But now that I'm retired, it's like, there's no topic I can't talk about. I can say whatever I want. And so it was very liberating in that way. And I did take it a lot further. And a lot of it was just airing all the things that I had held on to. Because it's not like I wasn't saying these things out loud in a Chiefs mess behind closed doors. Like, I would point out that like sailors don't trust us, and that's a fucking problem. And we would talk about it. And like, it was a lot. I talked about those things a lot when I was mentoring chiefs or chief selects or whatever as well. But it was when I transitioned, it was I talked a lot more openly about my mental health, which I think that was just more a readiness thing than anything, like a personal being ready to talk about it in that way. But yeah, I think I just opened myself up a lot more to things because I was always afraid of the Chiefs mess just coming for me with pitchforks and torches. I even when I was doing it on active duty and it was more measured, it was like I never once while I was on active duty got any negative feedback from a chief. When I retired and I got more aggressive, I started to get some. But I mean, in comparison to the chiefs that I have supporting me and telling me they feel the same way, and, or that I like opened up their eyes to things they hadn't understood, it's like 90-10. It's like not even close to being the majority. And so that's really the only big changes is I think I've gotten more support because I'm able to be more outspoken than I was. And
you just have more freedom.
Yeah, and to my surprise, the majority of the Chiefs mess agrees with me, which like, begs the question, like, okay, well, if the majority of the Chiefs mess, at least in the sample size I'm interacting with, agree with me, then why the fuck is the culture of the Chiefs mess so broken? And I think a lot of it's like individuals thinking it internally are not the collective, and most people are unwilling to say the quiet part out loud for fear of the Chiefs mess turning on them in their like microcosm, like in their like particular mess. And it's true, like that will happen. And Ariana is a great example of that. Like she was like my mini me, and she did some podcast stuff with me as a first class where she was critical of the Chiefs mess and was outspoken about certain things and put her name and face on it. And I warned her like offline, like, hey, real good chance the Chiefs mess is going to turn on you and your initiation season, because she was competing for Sailor of the Year in DC. I'm like, you're making chief. Like I can't promise it, but I'd bet the house. And so sure shit, she makes chief, and her experience is like horrific. And like that's a real thing that happens when you're outspoken like that. And so I had a real
easily
fear.
Pay the price.
Yeah, I had a real fear of it, but it never happened to me. But I think it's because of the way I kind of modulated what I was saying when I was saying it, and I was already a chief when I was saying it. So you're not an outsider. And that was the biggest thing I tried to focus on when I warned her, was like, look, I can be critical because I am one. And when I am critical, I always take ownership of my role in it. Like, look, I am part of the problem, and I understand that. And I want to be part of the solution, and I need you people to get on board and help me row that direction. But like,
well, I think there's two problems though that work against us in this whole arena of being outspoken on social media, especially on active duty. Number one, we're not given any kind of guidance, and we really are given. I mean, we say, oh, we have a social media policy, which has a bunch of do's and don'ts.
Guide that barely says anything meaningful. Like,
no,
and I'm like, to me, a guide's not policy. You need to have a DODI or
you need to have a DOD policy that's not selective enforcement. And that's really what it is. It's, I have these instructions about political activities, but if your politics don't agree with my politics, well, then you might not be doing the right thing. But if our politics line up, then I'll leave you alone and you can do whatever you want. And so that's number one. I think we need, and I do believe there's an all-nav. I don't know if you've been following this, but there is an all-nav that's forthcoming about personal use of social media for the active duty. So it's been, I've seen it in all these emails. So we'll see.
I wonder what it's going to say.
I have no idea.
I talked to Mick Pond-Smith about this too, where I was asking the question, like, why? Because Scotty Tokorzik was, I think he was Pac Fleet. And then he retired. He should have been MCPON instead of Honey, but that's another story for another time. But great dude, and he was doing this thing called Friday with Fleet, and it was like a podcast he would post on social media where he was just talking about stuff.
Sure.
And I asked, like, why are more people not doing that? Because I'm like, the current MCPON Honey did like a Reddit Ask Me Anything, but it was like goddamn dumpster fire. Like the people there couldn't keep up with the questions. The answers weren't great. They did follow up with a lot of stuff, but it was like, it wasn't super productive. It was
overly sanitized too.
And it was a great step in the right direction that they were even willing to do it. Sure. But it was still not great. And then, but then there's not like, why doesn't the MCPON have a podcast? Like you have PAOs, you have MCs, like just do this thing. So all he's got to do is walk in, sit down and talk and be transparent about the things. And then his all hands calls, like, why aren't they
I don't think they're empowered to do that. That's the problem. There's so much, and there's so much change and churn, especially right now.
But like if Fleet to Korzik is just doing it as a fleet, why can't the MCPON? Like, I guess like where does it say he can't do it? And if it doesn't say he can't do it, then I
think they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. I really do. Or getting a hard question and then not answering exactly the way somebody else wants you to answer. And people are afraid. People are so afraid to speak up. That's what it is.
For me, it's like, but why are you afraid? Because if you're an E10 or you're the CNO, right? Like, where are you going from here? The board of fucking Raytheon? Like, you're retiring. So like maybe I think
personal reputation. I hate to say that. I know it's sad.
They shouldn't be in the job if they're not willing. If you're incapable of sitting for 30 minutes and answering questions without ending up in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee or some shit afterwards, you shouldn't be in that job. Go home.
I agree. I agree. And that is definitely this is where you talk when we have these discussions about leaders and leadership. Leadership means taking risks. I mean, I'm still doing my show. I have faced trouble. I have had warnings. I have been talked to before. I have had people in my community who don't support what I'm doing, but I'm still doing it. And I am still very passionate about it. I tone it up, I tone it down. I do the best I can to try to have these conversations because I know how important it is for people to feel seen, heard, and valued and know that someone's going to take care of these problems. So the number one thing I think is the fact that they're not empowered. They don't have good policy by not being empowered. And then number two, this is also speaks to leadership. We don't have good investigative procedures for what happens when a sailor gets in trouble. We don't have a proper investigators. We don't have due process. You can't bring your own witnesses. You can't bring your own defense.
I was just listening to somebody
decisions.
Yeah, I was just listening to somebody talk about like how they thought, like a civilian that's never been in the military, that's like a political pundit, talking about how they think it's a terrible idea to remove like NJP authority from the commander. And I'm like, I think it's a fucking great idea because they have no goddamn earthly idea what they're doing. The PIO process, which I've been a preliminary inquiry officer fucking 34, 40 times in my career, and they give you little to no guidance. I have zero formal training, and I'm conducting an investigation that is going to decide the fate of someone's career.
Destroy somebody's life and destroy their mental health or and this is not, and I say this all the time, this is not about all the good JAGs out there. This is not about all the good IOs who try to do the best that they can. As Walk the Talk Foundation has laid bare, and many others, and Tim Parlatore has been on my show many times or twice and talked about this issue. It needs to get fixed. And until we have a system that people can trust and people feel safe serving in, I think that's part of the reason why the culture is the way it is. Yes, there's bad leaders. Yes, the chief's mess needs to get their shit together, or these people need to try to do things to make the culture safer and create standards. But I also think that they need policies and they need procedures that help them do that job properly.
100%. Yeah. So, I've applied that theory to. I was asking the MCPON about chiefs initiation, just like, if you read the Enlisted Leadership Development Continuum Instruction and you read any of the documents, but particularly that one policy document we have governing leadership development for enlisted people, the chief season is not mentioned a single fucking time in that document, and not once. And you're pointing at it. If you look at the laying the keel diagram, like it's in there as part of what we consider leadership development for enlisted people throughout the life cycle of their career. Begs the question, one, why is it not mentioned in the only policy document? And two, why is there no formal policy for the conduct of the chief season? Why do I not have training objectives? Why do I not have a master course document and instructor guides like we do for every other formal course of instruction in the entire U.S. Navy? my favorite line, like, there's a procedure for peanut butter and fucking jelly. I could show it to you. So like, if I got a procedure I'm supposed to follow to make you a fucking PB&J, how is there no procedure for how we train? Like, the most important training and education milestone for an enlisted person. Sure. I mean, before the Senior Enlisted Academy, but at which point most people attending that, they're so far beyond, like, you're trying to teach an old dog new tricks at the Senior Enlisted Academy. And while I think the curriculum and the faculty there are fucking incredible and it's the best tool that we have, I think it should be the Chief Academy, not the Senior Enlisted Academy. Like, that should be where you go at, like, in your first year or two as a chief, because like the things that they're teaching there are things that are fundamental and they're really great at it, but it's like, it's happening too late in the life cycle of an enlisted leader, because by the time senior chiefs and master chiefs get there, they're set in their ways. Like, they think, and their behavior has been validated by promotion and positional advancement and awards for the better part of a decade, probably, by the time they're a senior chief or a master chief. So at that point, it's like the Navy has been telling them, has been positively reinforcing their behavior through promotion, advancement, like the evals, the awards, all the things. So it's like, you're gonna tell them they're doing it all wrong. Like, they're not fucking listening. They're there because they think it's going to be mandatory for promotion eventually, or because they're going to be a CMC and it literally is mandatory. Yeah. So it's just like, the idea that we do not have a formal policy document of any kind for the chief season, to me, is just goddamn inexcusable and it's very telling that it's not mentioned in the instruction, and that it's the only like formal course of instruction, or I guess it's informal because there's no policy, but it's the only like course of instruction that we try to pretend is this formal requirement, but it doesn't have any government, like, governing document at all. Yeah. Like, I mean, the best you could point at is like the mission, vision, guiding principles, I guess, but like, there's no mandate that I use those in the construct of the activities and the training and all the things that happen during the chief season. And it's like, chiefs would push back on that and be like, well, of course there is. And it's like, yeah, but you thinking that it should happen is not a mandate. Like, it's not a policy, which means you can do whatever the fuck you want. Right. And there's no formal policy document saying otherwise, besides the MCPON guidance that may or may not even happen, that is passed down through CMCs that says thou shalt not do this and thou shalt do this. But like, the year I retired, Honey didn't even put out fucking guidance. He just put out his stupid little memos that no one took seriously. And so it's just like, okay, so when we stop the chief season because of some egregious like ethics violation or actual hazing or whatever, unless you can point at the UCMJ for hazing, it's like, what policy document are we using to hold that person accountable? There fucking isn't one. Like, right. How is there not? And you would get a much more uniformly quality product if I had people. If I had learning objectives. Like, how does an instructor or a facilitator know what they're supposed to do during these processes if there's no objective? If there's no objective. We have no idea what the fuck we're doing. And I agree. It lays bare the leadership incompetence amongst what we call our reservoir of like leadership experience and knowledge, because having been in it the number of times that I have, it's like, they don't know how to educate leaders. There are individuals that do, like, there are anomalies for sure. And based on those anomalies being the CMC sometimes and setting the culture and being able to train and mentor those chiefs, you get a good mess that runs a good season, but it's an anomaly. And that's a fucking problem because they're also a minority. And it's just like, yeah,
I agree. And it's frustrating. I that's one of the reasons I'll be honest with you that I did support the new SecDef, is that I saw that they were standing for change. I saw that the people who were coming in, I mean, even in Hexeth's book, he talks about a lot of these problems and these things that he was encountering within the services. And so I still remain hopeful. They did put out a new SecDef memo. I think it was today, about grooming standards and physical fitness standards. So I'm all for it. I'm
here for it too.
I'm here for it too. And you know what? I'll be supporting them every step of the way as I start to see some of these things come back.
speak intelligently on Hegseth individually, but like I think a lot of what I see happening, this is how my wife and I go back and forth about all the things we see in the news and all the things we hear, because we both, like, I'm a government contractor right now, like kind of. I work for a company that contracts with the government, so technically I'm not a government employee, but and then my wife works for DOD, like for a shipyard's HR department. And so she's been very involved in like all the 5 bullet points things.
Oh,
and
yeah.
like
What did you do? Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of different like people being like the hiring freeze affecting a lot of the people that they work with and all. And so like I think a lot of what they are doing or want to do will be a net positive over time. But the way in which they're doing it a lot of the times is really reckless and counterproductive, because like, for example, my wife has a story about a guy that got out of the military, was offered and accepted a job here on the other side of the country, sold his house, took out a TSP loan to move his family cross country to do this job, presumably secured a residence through renting or buying, and then in transit is told that job, like, we can't actually onboard you because of the hiring freeze, because they decided that jobs that weren't, like, if they weren't actually in the job, then that hiring freeze applied to them. And that's ruining people's lives.
It is.
And it's not the only example. And so it's like that kind of shit. I'm like, oh, you can't do that, man.
I can play devil's advocate for
But,
a second. I just want to play it for a minute. I know that
Okay.
we're way over time, but I'm all for devil's advocate.
I'll
Okay.
say, hey, I got all the time in the world. It's how long you want your podcast to be. You know
I
me.
know,
I'll go
I know.
3 hours if you let me.
And I'm not trying to defend the administration, because a lot of people will say that I will be by saying this, but this is the part that perplexes me whenever anyone brings up the hiring freeze or the probationary employees. I say to myself, okay, you're Doge, and you have to come in and you have to make cuts.
Yeah.
And you have to do them. And a job is nobody's job in life is ever guaranteed. Never.
Sure.
Like
Right. I agree.
like any day of the week, you could lose your job. It's just the way life works. Right. Nobody, unless you own your own business and your business is profitable and you're successful, then you have no control whether or not your job is going to still be your job the next day. So let's just say that.
Yeah.
Number two, you're Doge and you have to make cuts, and you have to make cuts that are not discriminating on anything other than some very objective criteria. Like, it has to be incredibly objective. What would you go after? If this is what your charge was, you would have to go after probationary employees. You would have to do hiring freeze. You would
totally
have to
fine with all of it.
Who are the people that are the lowest performers? And if you could show
Yep.
documentation of who those lowest performers are. So, and I'm not trying to say I love Elon and I'm pro Elon. I'm just saying, what other choice would you have if you were charged with cutting the federal government? That you know.
So for me, it's I don't agree with the cuts. I agree. I disagree. Like, I don't disagree with the cuts is what I think. I think I said agree. So I don't disagree with what they're doing. I agree with how they're executing it. So for me, it's like, yeah, do all those things. Just give them a 6-month window. Just say, hey, or 3 months or something reasonable. Like the employees, especially the ones that have been there for a long time. It's like, hey, we need to pare down these jobs. You have 6 months. Probationary employees, you were on probation.
That with the fork in the road. Remember all the people that took the deferred resignation?
Sort of,
they're doing that.
Sort of. There are a lot of people that are just getting fired, and then sometimes they're getting rehired because whoops, we fucked up. And then sometimes, like in the instance of we offered you a job and you accepted it, that we made a commitment. That money's spent already, as far as I'm concerned. And then if you want to wait 6 months and then tell them, okay, it's, actually you're a probationary employee and we're going to let you go, then fine. But like, you're destroying someone's life by not. And it's just a change in some mechanisms of delivery. It's not, you still end up with the same result. And then, oh, by the way, they're about to fund everything that they just cut with the new budget any fucking way. So what are we even talking about?
I mean,
remember the USAID turmoil about all the things that they cut, and then they're trying to fully fund USAID again next year. And it's like, well, what the fuck was all this stuff we were just doing? Did you even cut anything? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I'm not going to claim to be an expert or understand it enough to like dig my heels in on anything. The stories I've heard about the way in which they're going about executing the things, I have a problem with. I don't have a problem with the concept at all. I want government to be as small as it possibly can be. If I'm politically aligned in any way, it's like libertarian bordering on anarchist. Like I'm not a government guy, but I understand that this is the world that we live in. I just wish that our government would conduct itself in a way that, because like if you're claiming to be America first, you should be treating Americans with a lot more respect than we are, by not taking the time to make sure that we're executing this in a way that doesn't lead to people like that guy just getting his whole life turned upside down because they're looking at analytics and spreadsheets instead of these are human beings that have lives fair. And they're American voters and citizens, regardless of if their performance reports say they're doing a good job or not. And I have zero issue with canning poor performers, but like, it's unless they did something super egregious, the only reason they're being pared down with these efforts is because of the efforts, not because their performance reports are such that they should have been fired already. Probably, I mean, maybe the bureaucracy is fucking that up, but it's like, so for it to happen suddenly like that, that's the problem and like a lot of the veterans that are going to they're firing like 80,000 people from the VA, which it's like, I haven't been able to get a fucking meaningful medical appointment from them before they started firing people. So like, which is probably more of an efficiency issue than a manning issue. But like those veterans are rely on those jobs. And so it's like, if you're firing American veterans suddenly like that, and now they're just like, left with no other alternative. It's like, give them 3 months, man. It's like, these aren't people that are going to sit there and whine about their lot in life. They're going to get to work because that's what we do. And it's like, for it to be so sudden like that, fuck, man. Yeah. Like that feels like betrayal to me. Yeah. And so that's all I'm saying is like, give them a soft landing, give them a minute to figure out their life. So because on top of that, everything that's going on with the economy, it's like, what, you want to fucking make unemployment go up and make the economy be worse? Like, give them 3 to 6 months to find a different job. And then, we still end up in the same place with the pared down workforce and the underperformers are gone and blah, blah, blah. But like,
yeah. Well, we do need to get off this podcast. We've been on almost an hour and a half. So if you guys have been with us and stayed on
only an hour and a half,
I think we probably could have gone about 3 hours.
For sure.
For people who are not familiar with where to find you, tell everyone where they can check out your work.
Yeah. So DGUTSpodcast.com. It's an acronym for Don't Give Up the Ship, if ever anybody's wondering what the hell DGUTS means. It's Don't Give Up the Ship podcast. You can find it anywhere that you get podcasts. We're on YouTube. That's a great way to support us if you're interested. You can consume it on YouTube, but also we're trying to get up. We're like 7 subscribers away from being monetized and a small amount of like watch hours away from being monetized fully. So like, YouTube's great. You can find us anywhere that you consume podcasts. And then, DGUTSpodcast.com's got all the information. We're spinning new things up. The kind of the refocus on leadership development education material is I'm going to be doing a series that's going to be my primary focus going forward called Theory to Practice. That's going to be think like trust as an example. I'm going to talk about the theory of trust. I'm going to talk about trust as a concept within the skin of the military. And then I'm going to kind of talk about the nuts and bolts with practice of like how you earn trust, how you repair trust, what like the meaningful tools that you have to like use trust in a way that's productive for leadership and blah, blah, blah. So like, which it's the concept, I've unveiled the concept. I haven't done one of those series yet, but I'm working on it. That it's gotten a really great response and I think it's going to be really valuable. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And then you should see, we have Doc's Point of View. It's a corpsman that does a podcast for me. He's a HM1, does corpsman specific things. So if you know any docs out there, we drop one of those generally on Fridays. Again, we took a break for a little bit, but there's a bunch of those up. And then, a lot of new exciting things on the way. But those are the best ways to find me. So I
love it. I mean, you're one of the few. You, Damo, used to be Nikki.
Yeah, Damo and Damon.
But there's just a few of us.
Damo and Damon both got picked up for CMC.
I saw that. Yeah,
isn't that cool? I was so pumped. Both of them.
I'm happy for them. And I was on their show as well. And I think we're going to see Nikki, Nikki from MGTV. I think he's going to make.
Oh,
yeah. Nick. I think
I've talked to him quite a bit. Good. I was wondering about that. I've been checking in on him periodically.
Good. Yeah, there's quite a few people who are still on the show. Hey, I think I might have lost you. You are frozen on the screen. Are you back?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm back, I think.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But
all
yeah,
good.
like I was talking to him a little bit about like what was going on and why, and it sounded like the Navy just came for him for some reason, and I'm like,
Yeah.
why? Like, who gives a shit? Like, I don't think he was doing anything that crazy, but
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
there's a
sit here and
whole
say,
backstory. I know a little bit about it, but it's his
Okay.
story to share when he's
Yeah.
ready to share it. But
I told him that too. I was like, if you need a platform, bro, hit me up. Like, we can, if you want to, when you get to a point where you can talk about it,
Right.
I'm here.
Right.
I'll support him 100% because I think that's fucking ridiculous.
Well, he's definitely going to make a comeback. I appreciated his content. I thought he was doing a great thing for our sailors, and I loved having him on my show. I definitely need to get Damo on the show as well.
But I can link you up with him. I talked to Russ Smith about you too, and he loves you. So if you ever want to talk to him, I can link you up.
I actually met him at the Sea Services Leadership Association and talked to him a little bit. So yeah, let's connect offline, and I'd love to have him on the show. It's wonderful to continue to do this and to really focus in on Navy people because of course I'm a sailor, I'm prior enlisted. I love these kinds of conversations immensely and I don't always do them. And so this has been a rare treat to be able to kind of go back to my roots. Cause a lot of the stuff you're talking, I don't know a lot about the chief stuff. So I was never a chief, but I was, I made it to first class. So I have a lot of little, memories from a lot of things that you're talking about. So I really appreciate it, but I'll meet you backstage to say goodbye. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey,
really great.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
Awesome. All right, guys. I know this was a long one, but I think it was well worth your time. Next week, I cannot wait. I'm having Mark Fava on the show. He is an author. He had a book called like Lessons Learned with the Admiral. I'm probably mispronouncing the title, but it's a wonderful book about when he was an admiral's aide and all the different lessons that he took away from his boss. He was a P3 NFO. Then he became a lawyer. Then he became, it was P3 NFO. Then he was a lawyer, and then now he's, I think he's retired and just doing wonderful things. So just can't wait to have him on. As I always close out these calls, thank you so much for joining us. Things are going very good with me lately. No, I haven't been on video very much or done a lot of postings, but it's been a little nice taking a social media break and laser focusing on my retirement, as I did get retirement orders today. So very exciting, and I'll be back at you guys shortly. As I always say, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye now.